sorry about the glasses, but I'm going to be reading something, and I want to talk to you about the current state of the youth vote and the fact that the Republican Party is not connecting with young voters. So first of all, I'm talking to you about this because based off of the data from the last midterm election, we are really screwed with young voters. So overall, we lost the youth vote 67 to 32% nationally in the last midterm election. And the youth vote was really decisive in two particular elections that are really impacting us on the state level and in the Senate. So first, in the state level, Governor Scott Walker has been seen as a big fighter. He's fought back a recount. He won in a very narrow election last time. But in the last election, he lost by 1.2 percentage points. And he lost because the youth vote went for his opponent by 23 points versus 5 points in 2014. So he's not the governor of Wisconsin. We don't have that state in Republican hands going into 2020 because he lost the youth vote by such an increased margin in 2018. Second of all, in Nevada, where we lost a Senate seat, overall, young people increased in their voter turnout by 19% within Nevada. And because of that, the Republican running for Senate lost by about 3 points overall. But the bigger problem was that young voters went for the Democrat candidate for Senate by 37 points. That's a huge margin. There's not even a way to pick up what we lost because we'd have to make up so much ground in Nevada from the last election. Now, the reason this happened is because we currently have a whole bunch of 30-year-olds telling people how to connect with young people at the RNC. Let me ask you a question. If you were in marketing and you wanted to sell a product to a bunch of 18-year-olds, would you go to 30-year-olds to figure out how to talk to 18-year-olds? No. So why are we doing that within the RNC? It doesn't make any sense. Overall, I think that there's an idea in the RNC that in order to connect with young people, we have to talk about culture, about pop culture. This is true, but it's not the pop culture the RNC thinks it is. It's not Kanye West. I'm sorry, guys. He's not as relevant to young people as the RNC and the Republican Party thinks. To talk with young people, you have to know what's going on in their world. Every young surrogate in the Republican Party should know every song title on Ariana Grande's album. They should know why Mac Miller's death was such a big deal. And they should use that knowledge to get in the door with having conversations with young people. It's not about knowing that and only talking about that and ignoring policy. It's about presenting yourself as somebody who actually knows what's going on in the youth world. Because if you go in and you talk about, Venezuela and the economy, that all makes sense to Republicans, but young people aren't going to think that you actually know what's going on in their world. If you're a young person in the Republican Party, there's a mold you have to fit in. You have to fit into either the color block dress mold or, the button down suit and tie mold. There isn't a middle ground. And because of that, a lot of times young people look at the Republican Party and are like, why would I be part of that? There's no reason to be part of that. They're not doing anything for me. If the director of youth engagement at the RNC, Mitch Freckleton, doesn't know why it's a big deal that Ed Sheeran and Justin Bieber are releasing a song, he's already failed with connecting with young voters. When you have a situation like with Mac Miller dying, he had a song called Donald Trump where he talked about wealth. That right there was a way for us to get in and talk to young people about opioids, about addiction. We didn't do it. Instead, we spent 6 months on the Kanye West fiasco dissecting everything he did. That didn't help us with young people. 30-year-olds are telling people in the RNC that the way to connect with young people is to talk about policy, to lead with how great Donald Trump is. Here's the thing. I like Donald Trump as a person. A lot of young people don't. I'm from the generation that grew up watching Obama be very statesman-like and never raise his voice and things. It's weird for my generation to see a leader like Donald Trump. It's weird for us to see someone who's this blunt in policy. It doesn't make sense to us. So a lot of times we discount the Republican Party because we don't think President Trump is actually being presidential, even though he is in the policy world. One specific example of this is when young conservatives go to college campuses. They stand there and they stand on the stage and they take questions and everything. And a lot of times they're just the left's punching bag. They're not actually fighting back. They're either standing there and taking all the incoming or they're screaming. There's no real discussion. There's no ability for young people to look at that and say, hey, there's a role for me in the RNC. Would you want to stand on a stage and be screamed at by crazy people? Would you want to stand there and be called a racist and a Nazi? No, you wouldn't. So why would the RNC have increased interest in having young people come in? They wouldn't. I think a lot of times people at the RNC think that if we're going to talk about identity politics, then we can only talk about how terrible it is. A lot of times we have to talk about the fact that there aren't young women in the Republican Party, that there aren't young female surrogates in the Republican Party. And we can't because it's seen as being bad. There's sort of like this weaponization of young women who don't like feminism using it against us because we don't want to talk about how there isn't anyone who looks like us or represents us in the Republican Party. Overall, I think if we don't start to tackle this culture issue we have, if we don't start to make up these huge margins, 67 to 32% nationally is what we lost in the last midterm election, we're not going to have a chance to win the youth vote in 2020. We're at a 19-point deficit with women overall in the country. We can't have a 19% deficit with women voters and lose the youth vote 67 to 32% and win a national election. It's just not possible. So it's time to phase out 30-year-olds telling like 60-year-olds how young people think, and it's time to make up some of this ground where Scott Walker's not the governor of Wisconsin anymore because he lost by a 23-point margin. How did he lose from a 5-point margin in 2014 to a 23-point margin in 2018? What changed? We have to figure that out because it's only through that we can actually connect with young voters and win the youth vote in 2020. Thanks, guys, and please share this.